32 dakot minutes.
Oh, so that, yeah, I was right.
You're always right. We're live. We're now being live streamed.
We have a good
No excuses. It's male and female. Israel has grammar. Hebrew has grammar. We're going along. We're live. We're going to start class in a second. Everything you say is being recorded, Seth. Please make sure to mute yourselves as we get started. We don't want to have the background noise. We're being broadcast on a bunch of systems. We're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we are on Zoom, and we are about to rock and roll. I'm going to give people just another moment here to join. Today, actually, we're not going to read from the Torah portion. Today, we're going to read from the Haftorah. No, you're going to use the same book. Don't get so jumpy. You're going to open up your same Chumash we use every week, but we're going to open up to page 1379. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Seth, now it's time to be quiet because they can't hear two people online talking. Good evening. It is Parshas Korach. It is the fifth Torah portion in the book of Numbers, in the book of Bamidbar. It's also Erev, the 4th of July, very important day on the calendar. And I do think that I did not plan for the class to be connected to the 4th of July, but I was done preparing for the class. I was like, duh, it's mamish. No, mamish, it's exactly about the 4th of July because the whole Maisa, the whole shebang with the 4th of July is all about whether we should have a king or we should not have a king. Should we have King George or should we fight back? Is it worth dying for freedom and liberty and our democracy and our republic and all the experts on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Federalist Papers? Everyone in America is a big knacker, a big thinker when it comes to all these issues. And as a Jew, being that tomorrow America is going to celebrate the 4th of July, it's good to see what the Torah's view is on the monarchy, on kingship. And I didn't even have to make it up because it's directly from the Torah portion and the Haftorah. And how do we get there? This is how we get there. In our Torah portion, almost, I would say half the Torah portion is the story of the rebellion of Korach. Korach was a member of the Levite family. He was a son of Yitzhar, a son of Kahas. So Kahas had a couple children. One of them was Amram, who was Moses and Aaron's and Miriam's father. Another one of Kahas's children was Yitzhar. So Levi's grandchild. Levi had Kahas, Gershon, Kahas, and Merari, and his son Kahas had a couple of kids, including Amram and Yitzhar. Yitzhar had a son named Korach. So a great-grandson of Levi, a prestigious member of the Levite family, has a son named Korach. He's wealthy, he's wise, and he acts stupidly. So you could have money and you could have wisdom and you can make a severe mistake because arrogance and jealousy and misaligned holy aspirations can end you up in hot water, and it's exactly what happened to Korach. So I'm not going to go into every detail of the Korach story. We've shared that story multiple times over multiple years, and you can open up your Chumash to the 5th portion of Numbers and read it yourself. He tries to rebel. He gets 250 leaders of the Jewish people with him. They do a whole showdown with Torah, with an incense offering that's going to be brought to the temple, the tabernacle, and whoever's offering is going to be accepted will know that they are right. And of course, Korach and his mutiny failed. They were either burned to death or swallowed up in the ground. And the end of the rebellion is, the rebellion concludes. But what we see in the Parsha, and that's where we're going to get to the Haftorah, we see in the Parsha the issue with leadership and how what role leadership, whether it's kingship, monarchy, whatever term you want to use for it, what role it plays and how we are to treat it as Jews, both positive and refraining from negative. And that's why, because of the story of Korach, we have an Haftorah this week from the book of Samuel. Right? Remember, Samuel is the famous son born at the late age to Elkanah and Hannah. His mother was Hannah, the one that prayed in the tabernacle. And Eli, the high priest, thought she was drunk, but she wasn't. She was in deep prayer. And they give birth to a son named Shmuel, which means borrowed from God, because they believed that it was a gift from God. And they gifted him to be a leader of the Jewish people. And eventually he's chosen by God to be a prophet. Now, why do we read the Haftorah this week? Every week we read Haftorah, it's connected to the Parsha. Number one, because if we're talking about the leadership of Moses and the rebellion, the rebelliousness against Moshe, we need to discuss in the Haftorah a situation where leadership was put into question and how it was dealt with under those circumstances. And we're going to talk about that in relation to Samuel and King Saul and the Jewish people in his era. But secondly, and perhaps more interesting historically, is that Samuel was a grandson of Korach. He was from the Korach family. Remember, some of Korach's children survived. They were swallowed up in the ground, and as they were dying, they did tshuva, they repented, and God allowed for them to live. So actually, if you open up the book of Divrei Hayamim, not the book that we're reading, the book of Divrei Hayamim, the book of Chronicles, which is a biblical book that has historical information, will tell you that if you're really interested in history, everything in Judaism is precise. Korach had a son named Avyasov. Avyasov had a son, Osir. Osir had a son named Tachas. Tachas had a son named Tzvanya. Tzvanya had a son named Azariah. Azariah had a son named Yoel, who had a son Elkanah again, who had a son named Amasai, who had a son named Mochas, who had a son named Elkanah, and a son named Tzuf, and a son named Toach, and a son named Eliel, a son named Yerucham, and then a son named Elkanah, who was the father of Samuel. It's all listed in the book of Chronicles and the book of Divrei Hayamim. I believe, don't hold it against me, I believe it's chapter 6 in Chronicles and Divrei Hayamim that it gives you the list all the way from Korah, all the way from Samuel up to his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather Korah. So therefore, when it comes time to read the Haftorah, not only is it connected to Jewish leadership and the monarchy and why Jews have this conflicted relationship with kingship. We have a very conflicted relationship with the monarchy. And I don't mean the King George monarchy. I mean even Jewish monarchy, right? Throughout history, if you look at the book of Kings, there was a transition. In the days of Samuel, there was a transition from the judges. The judges are the ones that came after Joshua. There was a transition from the judges to the kings. How did that come about? It came about because the Jews came to Samuel and said, we want a king like all the nations. Now think of the chutzpah here. Samuel is the leader of the Jewish people. He's a spiritual master. He's a spiritual guide. He's the director. Whatever he tells the Jews on behalf of God, they are to listen. The Jews come to Samuel and they say, give us a king like all the nations of the world. Now, you say to yourself, what's the problem with that? Already in the book of Deuteronomy, in the 5 books of Moses, God said to the Jewish people, when they come into Israel, they should appoint for themselves a king. And that's where the whole debate comes from. Is kingship a good thing or not a good thing? And the answer is yes. It's a good thing and a not good thing. And it really depends on where we want that value. In other words, where's that value coming from? Samuel would have had no problem if the Jews would have asked for a king, because the role of the king was both to be a biblical figure that gives them spiritual guidance and to deal with the country as a king, a government. So had they come to Samuel and said, hey, we want a king because we want more spiritual guidance, we want more spiritual infusions, we want more spiritual upliftment, Samuel in a heartbeat. Samuel was a humble man. By all means, let's give it to them. Remember, Samuel inherently understood the mistake of his great-great-grandfather Korach, the mistake of when there's misaligned leadership. And if the Jews want a new leader that will give them spiritual guidance, by all means, but that's not what they asked. They asked to have a king like the Gentile world. They wanted to have a king that will be for them like a political leader. They were jealous of the nations around them who had these political chevra, right? They had these big political leaders, and they felt like, why are we missing out on having a political leader too? And Samuel had a dilemma. What does he do? But nevertheless, right? God instructs Samuel to appoint King Saul as a king, Saul from the tribe of Benjamin, to appoint him as a king. Why did he do that? Because God realized that they need someone to knock them into shape, so they have someone to follow. Even for basic things, forget about spiritual, lofty stuff, just basics. In other words, we can poo-poo government all we want, but if we can't learn to live with ideals that are biblical in nature without a government, right? All the libertarians in Montana scream at me, oh, what do we need the government for? I'll tell you what we need it for. Look how you treat your neighbor. If the government wasn't here, you'd probably treat him even worse. So of course, in a perfect world where everyone was living in a godly lifestyle, where the Torah's values were inherited to every single citizen, where we don't murder, and we don't rape, and we don't steal, we don't lie under oath, and we fix our own bridges, and we pave our own roads, and we take care of our neighbors, and if someone's hungry, we give them food, and if someone's homeless, we give them a home. Sure, what do we need a government for? But when we're not doing that, the role of a king, the role of the monarchy is not only for spiritual guidance, it's also for practical governance. So when they came to Samuel, he was conflicted because their intentions weren't good. They just wanted to copy everyone else's political machine. Right? Every time some politician stands up and says they're the solution to the Washington swamp, you know you're in trouble. Right? What was Reagan's famous line? When you hear government say, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you, is what you better duck and run. And he's right. We shouldn't need a monarchy to teach us that. We shouldn't need a government. Okay, we don't have a monarchy. We shouldn't need a president, a prime minister, a politician to tell us that. But if we're not going to learn to live by biblical spiritual values with mentors and teachers and rabbis, I agree, by the way, 99% of the topics that we talk about from a political standpoint, we shouldn't need the government to be involved in it. Why is the government involved in marriage? Why is the government involved in abortion? Why is the government involved in helping the poor? We shouldn't need them in any of that stuff. We shouldn't need the government to be involved in polluting our water systems and our rivers, because we should be menschlich and treat the water and our environment properly ourselves. And if we follow biblical values, we wouldn't waste food, because the Torah says not to waste food, and wouldn't pollute our water and our air, because the Torah says not to, and we wouldn't destroy the biblical concept of marriage, because the Torah tells us how to get married, and we wouldn't abort babies on random, because the Torah tells us how and when it's permissible and when it's not permissible. We wouldn't have to worry about poor people on the streets, because no community would ever allow that to happen in the first place. But until that's the reality, that's where the Torah says the monarchy comes along, and we're here to do both things. So I want to actually look at the verses here for a moment on page 1379, just to read the Haftorah inside. The words of that took place with Samuel. Samuel said to the people, let's go to Gilgal and renew the monarchy there. All the people went to Gilgal. They all willingly confirmed Saul as king there before God in Gilgal, and they slaughtered peace offerings there before God. Saul and all the people rejoiced greatly. Samuel said to all Israel, by the way, the reason they did a second inauguration for Saul is because when he was first inaugurated, there were some people that were unhappy. And it was only after he took over the kingship and he defeated the king Nachash of Ammon. There was a king of the Ammonites named Nachash, which by no coincidence means snake. He was defeated by King Saul. And after that, everyone joined the bandwagon. He had a success. And even the naysayers said, oh, maybe, okay, we accept him. So there was a second, you'll read about the second inauguration. So Samuel said to all Israel, look, I have listened to your request about everything which you said to me, and I have appointed a king to reign over you. Now look, the new king is walking before you. I have become old in age. My sons are supporting the king here with you. I have walked before you from my youth until this day. Here I am. Testify against me before God and before his anointed king. Have I taken anybody's ox? Have I taken anybody's donkey? Have I robbed anybody? Have I oppressed anybody? Did I take payment from anyone's hand that caused me to hide my eyes about his wrongdoing and not punish him properly? Tell me while I can respond to you. Don't come later and tell me that I was I wasn't a good leader. I'm telling you, if you have an issue with how I led the Jewish people, step up now and tell me. Did I ever take a bribe? Did I ever take $1 from you guys? I want to leave this job, give it over to King Saul, but I want to leave with my clean, beautiful, pure reputation. And then he continues. They said, you did not rob us or oppress us, nor did you take anything from anyone's hand. He said to them, God is your witness, and his anointed king is witness this day that you have not found anything inappropriate in my hand. God and his anointed are our witnesses, they said. By the way, no president in American history could ever say that. Samuel said to the people, God made miracles through Moses and Aaron and brought your fathers up from the land of Egypt. Now stand, and I will debate with you before God concerning all the righteous acts which he did to you and your forefathers. So he's reminding them of all the miracles. And then he says, when Jacob came to Egypt and your fathers cried out to God, and God sent Moses and Aaron, they brought your fathers out of Egypt, and they settled them in the place without a king. But they forgot God, their God, and he delivered them into the hands of Sisera, the commander of the army of Chatzor, into the hand of the Philistines, and into the hand of the king of Moab, who waged war with them without a king. They cried out to God, and they said, we have sinned, and we have abandoned God, and have served the deities of Baal and Ashtaroth. Now save us from the hand of our enemies, and we will serve you. And God sent you Zerubbabel, Badan, Japheth, and Shmuel, the different leaders of the Jewish people, and he saved you without a king from the hand of your surrounding enemies, and you lived in safety. When you saw, and here's this king Nachash of the Ammonite king Nachash, when you saw that Nachash, the king of the Ammonite nation, came upon you, you said to me, we don't want a judge to lead us to war as in the days of our fathers, but we want the king that rules over us to lead us to war. But you were foolish because God, your God, is your king. Why are you looking for a king if you have a king? Right? The last few months, there's been these crazy people on Twitter talking about JC, about the Christian so-called savior. And they do they do his name, it starts CHR, is king. There's a whole campaign about him being king. I'm like, you shaita. There's only one king. And that's the King of Kings, Almighty God, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. So he says to them, Samuel says to the Jews, you wanted a king to fight the king of Ammon, Nachash? We have a king, it's called God. How many fights did we have before we didn't have a king and we took him out? So why over here did you need it? But nevertheless, but now you have a king whom you have chosen, whom you have requested, and God has now consented for him to be appointed king over you. And basically, he goes on for the rest of the Haftarah. He gives them blessing, he gives them support, and he tells them that the king will lead you as long as you follow him properly, which unfortunately King Saul's kingship didn't last that long. It had a tragic ending until God told King David to take over, which, by the way, Samuel appoints King David as well. But that's the reason. The reason that Samuel was hesitant, the reason why Judaism has this conflicting approach to kingship is really dependent on why do you want the king? Are you looking for a leader to replace God as your political leader? To win your wars, to win your battles? We have a God for that. You want a Nasi? You want a king like Moses? You want a king like Samuel, who wasn't a title of king, but also acted as a king, being a spiritual guide, a spiritual master, an influence of positivity, like King Josiah later, or King Chizkiyahu, Hezekiah later. You want that kind of king? I'm all in. But it's not what they really wanted. They wanted to sort of feel good. They wanted like a nationalistic thing. Like the modern Zionist, Theodor Herzl and his crew. Judaism wasn't good enough for them. They had to try to invent a modern invention of Jewish nationalism without Judaism. So going back, they wanted to have a king. I'm going to be a powerful people. We're independent people with a national Babamaisis. We have a king and we have a Torah. We have a constitution, a document, a governing document that's called the Torah. We don't need a new governing document. I know it's the 4th of July, I better be careful. But with all due respect to the Constitution and to the Founding Fathers and to the Federalist Papers and to the Bill of Rights, it ain't the Torah. It could be godly inspired, it could be godly induced, it could be godly whatever. It didn't come from God, it came from human beings. And I've always told you this, but I'll tell you again just in case you forget. The Torah doesn't have amendments, the Constitution does. And we probably do ourselves a favor, we got a few more amendments. And so it's a good document. It's the best modern government that the world has seen in generations. But it ain't from God. We don't need a constitution to tell you. You need a constitution to tell you how to live as a lawful American citizen, which we cherish with incredible value. We love this country. We love its values. We love its freedom. We love the founders who believed in God. And even our currency says, in God we trust. But don't ever substitute that with the Torah. Our liberty doesn't come from the Constitution. It's an inalienable right that comes from God. It was given to us, endowed by our Creator, not by the Founding Fathers. And so if you have a Torah and you have a king and you allow for the spiritual guidance in your life, then you're set. But if you only want the king for the political stuff, so you could be a powerful political entity and take out the others, that's not Yiddishkeit. That's not Judaism. In Judaism, we don't have to take out anyone besides idolatry. We don't have to take out anything to make our faith and our relationship with God strong. So had the Jews come to Samuel in our Haftorah and said, Samuel, we love you. You're an incredible spiritual leader. We're worried you're getting a little old. Could you appoint a new spiritual leader for us? We want to have a powerful king who will roar with Torah teachings and give us inspiration, with his hands and his big beard. He'll give us inspiration. We want that. Samuel would have no issue. The reason he was challenged because he saw where it was coming from. And that's a very important thing that society gets so caught up. How often, actually, since my entire life, since I've been old enough to listen to a radio, every time someone gets elected as president, 50% of the country goes into Shiva mode. They're sitting Shiva because their candidate lost. You would think they were voting on the creator of heaven and earth. It's a president of one nice little country called America. If it's really that scary, you move to Greenland. It's always been my favorite place anyhow. There's no people. Weather's just as cold as Montana. And you sit on your little hut and you look at the water in the mountains, you celebrate with your creator. If you're really that concerned, get out. Oh, but the Constitution's going to fall apart. The country's going to fall apart. So move. What are you crying about? There's a big world out there. You ever tried Moscow? Pyongyang? I hear Wuhan is really nice. But my point is that it's okay. It's important. I vote in every election. The Rebbe taught us that if we live in America and we're free people, we were gifted as Jews the ability to vote. We should never miss even a local municipal council, city council election because it's a gift. The Jews have never had the right to vote like that. I'm not poo-pooing the beauty of this country. I'm poo-pooing the lack of recognition that God is the one that runs the world. As the prophet says, Leiv Malachim Nesarim B'Yad Hashem, the heart of kings and ministers are in the hands of God. Stop freaking out every time the wrong guy gets elected. First of all, because the other 50% of the country thinks he's the right guy or she's the right woman. And second of all, because they don't run the world, God does. But I want to take it even a step further. I want to talk a little bit further. This is based on a talk from the Rebbe in, I believe it was the 70s, where he talked about this week's Haftorah, but why Saul saw the request about kingship as such a negative thing, why he was so bothered by it. If clearly in the book of Deuteronomy, there's a commandment that we should have a king. Right? And before they go to Israel, God said, make sure to have a king. If that's the case, why was he so bothered by the request? And even furthermore, if it was such a bad thing, then why did God agree that King Saul, Shaul HaMelech, should become the king? So here we come to a very, very powerful idea in Hasidic thought, and it dates back to at least the third Chabad Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, so in the 1800s, that there's two roles that a king plays, and it really depends on the spiritual state of the people. When the public, when the nation, when the Jews are in a spiritual state, a pretty low spiritual state, then the king's job is simply to keep law and order. Like it says in Ethics of Our Fathers, that we pray for the welfare of the government, because if it wasn't for the government, people would swallow each other up alive. So when people are in a low state of spiritual and functional and interpersonal behavior, so you need a king simply to keep people in a straight line. But when we're in a higher spiritual state, a higher cognitive state, our consciousness is more alive, and we're not worried about people misbehaving in basic laws of civil obedience. So then the king's job is to lift us up to a state of holiness and a state of spirituality where the people can't go on their own. So he takes them from where they are and uplifts them even higher. But they have to be high in order to be lifted higher. He can't lift them that high if he has to deal with basic, law and order, making sure they don't riot and break down streets and steal from their neighbor and murder and rape and kill and lie and cheat. So that's why Shmuel was disappointed. He wasn't mad at the Jews for asking for a king. When they asked for a king to bring law and order like the rest of the Gentiles, he realized how low they were spiritually, which on some level was a reflection of himself because he was their spiritual leader till that point. How could it be that they were in such a low spiritual state? And therefore, he wasn't upset at them as much as he was disappointed in the reality that that's where they were. And yet he didn't want to stop it. He went to God, and God said, yeah, if that's what they need, that's what you give them. Sometimes people need a king just to keep them in shape. Sometimes people need a government just to make sure they don't act like animals. Is that a perfect world? No, a perfect world wouldn't need the government altogether. Or in a perfect world, you'd want a spiritual titular figurehead who would allow you to be uplifted even higher heights because they're much higher spiritually and they can carry you with them. But you have to have some basics of spirituality before that. The Jews in the days of Samuel didn't have it, which is why they asked for Saul, which is why Samuel was disappointed. But you know what? Sometimes you need a king, you need a leader just to knock you into basic shape, just to make sure you're a decent mensch and you have the basic law and order. And it's actually a great lesson, the Rebbe says, for our days of exile, right? Because who are the kings in our generation? It's not the politicians, it's the great sages of Israel, the great rabbis, not every rabbi of a shul, but the great sages, the Talmudic, halachic sages, the Rebbes, the Rosh Yeshivas, of our generation, the great rabbis. And you say, I'll go to the rabbi when I need something really spiritual, but my day-to-day, I don't need the guidance of the rabbis. I don't need the guidance of the Jewish sages. I don't need the guidance of the Rebbe or the Rosh Yeshiva or the Gadol or the great sage. I got to figure it out. I'll go to them when I have a deep philosophical, mystical, spiritual, halachic, complex halachic analysis that needs to be addressed. Then I'll go to them. But for basics, how to treat my wife and children, how to treat my husband and my parents, how to run my business, what advice they can give me on how to be healthier emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically. I don't need to bother them for that. Comes along the Torah and says, you're wrong. The role of a king, the role of a leader is to be there for you and to deal with you even in the most mundane, in the most practical, in the most lowly aspects of life. So often the reason we find out about people later that they had all this double identity where behind the scenes they were living a double life is because they're scared to ever talk to the mentors in their life about what's really going on in their life. So they never fix it and ends up going for decades. But it could have been fixed if you had a spiritual mentor that wasn't only someone to discuss lofty stuff, but sometimes to discuss even the most lowly temptations and indulgences and realities of life that sometimes we're scared to talk to anyone about. A week from yesterday, By the way, next week, Wednesday, I'll be flying back from New York. So if I feel up to it, I'll send an email on Thursday and we'll do class on Thursday. But I'm going to New York on Tuesday. If you didn't see the email, you can send me your name and your mother's name for blessing when I'm at the Rebbe's resting place. But I'm going to be on Tuesday at the Rebbe's resting place on his 30th yard site. 30 years. And I remember the Rebbe's funeral like yesterday. And yet here we are 30 years later, and the Rebbe's is alive today and being permeated in Jewish life wherever you turn. But one of the most beautiful things about the Rebbe was not his brilliance in Torah. He was a brilliant, brilliant Torah scholar beyond. He was a leader sought after by every Israeli leader. He was a lot of things. I'm not going to give you the Rebbe's biography, but to me, what spoke mostly about the Rebbe was, as a child, I was 12 years old when he passed away, but till he was 10 years old, I'd go by for dollars, and he always gave me attention like I was the only thing in his world, even though it only lasted a few seconds each time. But for my birthday, he'd give me an extra $1. Which rabbis deal with 7-year-old kids? Like, come on, I'm a big rabbi. I have 5 sacks of mail come every day from all over the world with requests and guidance, and I'm going to deal with some 7-year-old kid who has a birthday party? That was the Rebbe. There was never something too small for him because it was the leadership, even in the small actions of life, that mattered most. I was telling Chavi the other day, last Shabbos, I was telling Chavi that Rabbi Kaplan of blessed memory, he was the Chabad rabbi in Tzfas. His wife, his daughter-in-law Rivki was with us a few weeks ago from Israel. But he was an incredible rabbi, brilliant, brilliant rabbi, who was killed in a car crash in Belarus on the way to Minsk in 1998. I was actually at his funeral because I was in yeshiva in Israel. And he once wrote to the Rebbe either as a teenager or as a child, that he's embarrassed to say, but every night when he comes home from yeshiva, he goes into the kitchen and he checks in all the pots in the kitchen, and whatever's left over, he gobbles down. So he's looking for some guidance about how not to gobble the food in the kitchen. Like, he's a kid writing, he's struggling, he's probably struggling with weight. And the Rebbe said to him, I want you to think that one day you're going to be a big rabbi. How would your congregants see it if they saw you standing at the pots, gobbling down things from the... Right? The Rebbe gave him this little guidance that could lift him up a little bit so that he shouldn't be so addicted to the food in the kitchen, even though he'd already eaten dinner, to come and eat more. Most rabbis would ignore a nudnik of a kid sending me a crazy letter about what to do with the pots and pans in the kitchen and overeating, but that wasn't the Rebbe. The Rebbe wasn't going to ignore anything. So actually, on that note, I want to conclude tonight with a story that happened to my father-in-law, to Chavi's father. I only heard about it a few weeks ago, and it's really captured my mind since then about that a king's job is not only to deal with the big stuff, but also with the small stuff. So my Chavi's father, Rabbi Chaim Block, for those of you that are not from Bozeman and haven't met him, him and my mother-in-law opened Chabad in South Texas in San Antonio in 1985 when Chavi was 6 months old. And she's the oldest of 9, and 40 years later, almost 40 years later, Chavi's turning 40 this summer, so almost 40 years later, it's an empire of Jewish life. But he grew up in London, Ontario. It's a little town, it's not 300,000 people, but it's about 2 hours, 2 hours east. 2 hours east. Sorry, yeah, it's 2 hours west of Toronto, between Toronto and Detroit. He went to the local day school there. He was born, I believe, in 1961. So this story took place when he was about 8.5, 9 years old. They wanted to buy for the school, the kids in the school wanted to buy what had just come out, an electric pencil sharpener. So they needed to do a fundraiser to raise the $9 they needed for the electric pencil sharpener. So they decided they're going to do a play for the school, for the parents, and through the play, they'll raise the money for the pencil sharpener. What play were they going to do? They were going to do the story of Yutas Kislev, the story of the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, being arrested by the Tsarist government, sitting in jail for 53 days, and his liberation, and they'll make a play and they'll raise the money. Being a Chabad kid at 8.5, 9 years old, he sent a letter to the Rebbe as a child, asking for a blessing that the fundraiser and the play should go well, and he sent the script of the play to the Rebbe. He said, I called him before the class. I called him 2 hours ago to confirm some of the details. It was Shabbos. They were sitting at home. and the mail person came to the house, and I have a special delivery with mail from New York. After Shabbos, they opened it up. It was a letter from the Rebbe addressed to Mr. Chaim Aaron Block, which was my father-in-law at 9 years old, Mr. Chaim Aaron Block. And he sent me just before class the letter. Here's the English letter that the Rebbe responded to the 9-year-old boy. So I'm going to read you that letter. It says, Shalom Avracha, which means peace and blessing. I was pleased to receive a letter in which you wrote that you are putting on a play to honor of Yutas Kislev. It gives me the assurance that you know the history of this important day and realize also that the main thing in remembering events that happened to the Gedolei Yisrael, to the great luminaries of Judaism, is to strengthen the daily conduct in a way that would please them. This applies to both old and young, but it is well known that the Alter Rebbe, whose Chag HaGeula we observe on the 19th of Kislev, the day of liberation, gave special attention to the education of the young. May God grant that you should be an inspiring example to all your friends and a source of true Yiddish and Hasidish nachas to your parents, with all the blessings for bright Hanukkah days. And then the Rebbe, unlike many letters where his secretary signed it, the Rebbe signed his name on the bottom of the letter alone. So here's the Rebbe, and the date was Kislev of Tafshin Lamed, so it was the end of 1969. It was December of 1969. What's bothering the Rebbe? What's he spending time with? With a boy who's raising $9 for a pencil sharpener for the Torah, for the Jewish school, to enhance Jewish education, to make the school more exciting, to make a play that will raise money. That's what's bothering him. That's what he's investing his time with. And that's my point. To be a leader is very easy to have big statements. Ooh, we're going to save this, and we're going to save that, and we're going to do this big thing. What about the small things? You want to judge Jewish leadership? It's not just in the big things. You want to judge what a Rebbe is? It's not in the big accomplishments. It's in the boy who's eating too much from the pots and pans, and it's the boy who's raising money for a pencil sharpener. And it's the mother who doesn't know if she should be induced, and the doctor says one thing and she doesn't feel that way, and the Rebbe is going to guide them. Or like when I was a child and I wrote about it, if you got the Montana Jewish Voice in the mail, and I hope you did, you see there's an article there about me and Dr. Feldman. When I was a child, and the Rebbe told my father, when it came to a medical question, you should follow the instructions of a friendly doctor. Then the Rebbe wrote Feldman's name. I was 3 years old. Okay, the Rebbe, my father writes to the Rebbe in 1983 or 84, right? The Rebbe was in his 80s already, spending time. Yeah, he was turned 80 in 1982. Well, that was in 92. But the point is, if there's a Jewish person or a non-Jewish person that has an issue in their life and they need guidance, kingship is not just about the rock and roll and the big parades and the big inaugurations. That's in funky politics. In real leadership, it's about everything. It's about the big things too. It's about changing the world and big deal. It's also about changing the individual and being there for people, holding their hand, even in the smallest of endeavors. And it is my hope that in my little way here in Montana, with my beautiful community around the country that we've created, that I show up in that way. But it's something I strive for every day, never to turn someone down because I think that the thing they're asking me about is trivial. Because to me, it may seem trivial, but to the person requesting and the person asking, it's not trivial. Otherwise, they wouldn't be asking about it. May we all live up to that standard of leadership, like the Rebbe, like Samuel, like the Jewish people back then, and may we merit sooner than later, God willing, before next Yartzeit on Tuesday, to be together with the Rebbe again with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. May it be speedily in our days. Amen. Have a rockin' week, and stay tuned to the email on Thursday as to whether we're going to have class or not. Sei gesund. I'm going to end the